Antaryascha bahirvidhutatimiram jyotirmayam shashvatam sthanam prapya virajate vinamatam ajnanamunmulayan pashyan vishvamapidamullasatiyo vishvasya pare paraha tasmai Sri Ramanaya Lokagurave Shokasya Hantre Namaha. Tasmai Sri Ramanaya Lokagurave Shokasya Hantre Namaha. So we're going to continue with self-inquiry, and we know what Bhagavan told us about self-inquiry in Updesaram, in Saddarshanam, 40 verses that he wrote on reality. And in his innumerable questions and answers with devotees in the old hall, or recorded otherwise by Devraj Mudaliar or Suri Nagamma and many. So we were talking about how Bhagavan has always given the answer to abide by the self, which means that we should stay with the ultimate self, the reality, the truth, the only truth. And we mortals find that difficult. And we have talked about it in the previous satsangs. We find it difficult. Why? Because our world is full of objects. I'm surrounded by objects, and objects doesn't just doesn't mean my laptop or my phone or my camera. It means my body, my relatives, my education, my color. Everything about me is about me and my objects. And there is an ego attached to all these definitions. If I'm very educated, whether I exhibit that or not, when I inquire into my nature in the limited way, or the limited I that we talked about last time, the small I, the egotistical me, the ego is attached here. And that can be checked. When we become purer, difficulties are thrown onto us in our lap, and those kinds of difficulties give us experiences to tell us, oh, I was only talking about my egotistical status or stature. And that's what is something that kind of comes as first step towards us to understand that, oh, my definitions, my perceptions, my realities are all about me. And we don't get beyond that to be with the self. We always are surrounded by these things, and my life is only starting with my first person ego, I. As Bhagavan has said, your first ego is your individual I, not the ultimate I. And here is the clarity that we must constantly ruminate on. We constantly should do this as a mantra, as a japa, that when I'm talking, it's my small I. When I'm meditating, I'm trying to get to my ultimate I, my ultimate self, and I don't do that. And this is where we have missed out. We as devotees miss out. We talk about what Bhagavan has said. We read this and read that, and we read Saddarshanam, Updesaram, but we don't look at our own personality. And Bhagavan has said that. And I wanted to allude to a couple of things today. And the first thing I wanted to start with was that last time, in the conversation, or the last time, I don't remember, it came up again and again. How can I ask a question to myself? It was a dialogue going on, and the person was saying, how can I ask a question to myself? The question itself is baseless. He was saying, inquiring into my nature is baseless, because how can I ask a question to myself? And this is where our obfuscation, meaning our cloudiness, our haziness, our unclear thinking, our not having clarity about it is revealed in questions like this. Don't we talk to ourselves all the time? The answer to that conversation, and we were not having a Q&A at that time, the person was just talking and was saying, how can I ask a question to myself? Well, understand, we constantly are talking only to ourselves. Most of the time I spend in my life is about myself, talking to myself. Doesn't mean I'm always loudly talking to myself, but I'm always telling myself, no, I shouldn't do that. Oh, I will do that. The question is absolutely valid. I must ask myself, who am I? Because I'm always asking myself things. Haven't we known even today's thing? Oh, should I go there now? No, I'll go later on. Oh, when I go there, I'll do this, that, and then I'll come back. All those are conversations with ourselves. And we should always be cognizant of that as something that my mind is always ogling, is always spitting out, is always vomiting thought after thought after thought after thought after thought. My mind never ceases to do that. And once I begin to capture that, once I begin to repose with that, once I begin to constantly say, oh, look at how I talk to myself, then we know that we are beginning the practice. And we have a long way to go. But we are beginning the practice of finding out who really is within me. Where do I come from? How have I arrived here? And once I know my limited self, as Vivekananda used to tell people when devotees would ask him, I want to love God, or can you show me God? I don't have the exact words in front of me. But then when they would plead to Vivekananda, help me, he would say, do you love yourself? Do you understand the question? To understand the question, you must love yourself to be able to love God. Go. When you love yourself, come back. Then I'll tell you how to. So here I've selected a couple of articles, not a couple, at least one that I wanted to read, where Bhagavan pinpointedly tells a devotee how to do the inquiry. And Bhagavan gave different answers to different people at different times. It doesn't mean that that answer is valid for everybody. And some answers will touch us, some answers will not touch us. But here is a very, very profound dialogue between Manu Subedar. Manu Subedar was a member of the Legislative Assembly during the British times. Let me go to that. Okay, here it is. And look at I'm going to read portions of this article. And if you listen carefully, you will see what an intense devotee he was, and what specific elucidation, clarity Bhagavan gave him. Manu Subedar was a member of the Central Legislative Assembly in the pre-independence era. So these are all talks from 1930s and all that. And I'm going to read this because it's not a very long article. It will take about just 2 minutes. I was alone in the car from Katpadi to Tiruvannamalai and wanted to go over my questions, revise them if necessary. The questions he had written to ask Ramana Maharshi. As I formulated each question, I found I knew the answer. So when I went to and had the darshan of the Maharshi, I had really no questions to ask. And this is not only one devotee writing. Hundreds of devotees have written about similar experience, that they came prepared to ask questions of Ramana Maharshi and not go back until they got the answer and they found that the answers had either come to them, or the questions had evaporated, or someone else was asking a very similar question when they entered the hall. So here, Manu Subedar says, I was carefully formulating my questions, and I found that as I was going over them, that I already had the answer. And when I entered the old hall with Bhagavan's presence, I really had no questions to ask. I presented to the Maharshi the Avdhuta Gita and the Ashtavakra Gita, published by Sastu Sahitya Mundralay Trust, Ahmedabad, of which I am the chairman, and drew his attention to the first verse of Avdhuta Gita, which says, now listen to this carefully, it is through the grace of God, that in men with knowledge is born a desire to experience cosmic unity, a desire which protects them from the great dangers of samsara. To make it simple, just for the sake of clarity, as we play this tape later on, as recording, I'm just going to dabble a little bit into Hindi for a moment. So he says that in Avdut Gita, the first shloka is that बहुत कम लोग बाग होंगे जिनके ऊपर ये आशीर्वाद होगा कि उनको इस अलौकिक जो हकीकत है, अलौकिक जो सत्य है, उसके साथ मिलने की इच्छा हो. ये उनके भाग्य की बात होगी, हर एक को नहीं होगा. It is only through the grace of God that in men with knowledge is born a desire, एक इच्छा प्रकट होगी उसको, to experience cosmic unity, अलौकिक शक्ति के साथ मिलने की उसके अंदर एक भावना खड़ी होगी, a desire which protects them from great dangers of संसार. और इस तरह की भावना, इस तरह की इच्छा, एक अच्छी इच्छा उनको संसार से बचाती है. Next paragraph, with infinite compassion in his eyes, the Maharshi looked at me and instructed one of the followers to bring a book. This was the Mahabhakta Vijayam of Nabaji Siddha. Bhagavan opened the book and began to read. And in parentheses, in brackets, he says, I noted with awe that the book opened exactly at the page where he intended to read. The Maharshi seemed to relish reading the discourse. And that is another thing. Bhagavan would pick up a book and give it to somebody, say, have you read this? And it will open up on the page where he wanted them to read it. Here, Manu Subedar is writing that Bhagavan picked up a book and opened it and started reading exactly at the page where he wanted to read it. And this is also an experience narrated and shared by many, many, many people. With infinite, so that is the Maharshi seemed to relish reading. There are teachers who mystify in order to impress the pupil. कई लोग बाग इस तरह से बात करते हैं जैसे कि उनको सुनने वाले उनसे प्रभावित हो जाएं, तो वो एक तरह से जैसे कि एक उसमें है, एक ट्रांस में है, वैसे बात करते हैं, which they should not. The Maharshi, on the contrary, has the direct method. He discloses the truth and the whole truth in the simplest form, in which he has not only formulated it as a thought, but lived it as an experience. So whatever Bhagavan spoke was because of his own personal experience of realization. The look, and this is the last two paragraphs, the look which the Maharshi gives you is a question. Now, no one else has written this, but this got clarified very quickly. The look which the Maharshi gives you is a question. At least I felt it so. Manu Subedar says it was his feeling, but people have not said that. The question is, I see a unity, but you keep grasping at the variety. As if Bhagavan is asking him the question, I see a unity, as if you are connected with the self, but you keep grasping at the variety of my world. Why don't you know yourself properly and realize your true self? This is one of the most coveted dialogue, because Bhagavan did not go up to this extent with 90%, 99% of the devotees to clarify this. He says here, why don't you know yourself properly and realize your true self? We have to know ourselves properly. The limited myself has to be understood by me firmly, completely, and to know the real self. You can then march on to the realization of the unity of self with the self. You can then march on to the realization of the unity of the self with the self. Nothing is so helpful as the august presence of the Maharshi for those who seriously intend to progress on the spiritual path. There is a spiritual communication and kindliness in his looks, eliciting what is best in a person. His presence during the silent hour acts as a catalyst, establishing us to secure our spiritual yearning. There is grace and benignity in the way he looks at the devotees as mother looks at her children. Talking a little bit later, we just read a very short reminiscence by Manu Subedar, who was a great devotee of Bhagavan. He was a member of the Legislative Assembly of India at that time. And what a profound instruction Bhagavan gave, where Bhagavan very simply broke it up for him, which normally Bhagavan did not do. If you had just missed it, I'm going to read that portion alone again. First of all, Manu Subedar feels when Bhagavan was looking at him and he was looking at Bhagavan, as if Bhagavan had a question on his eyes. And most people didn't feel ever. But here is the clarification of that. He says, I see, the question is, and he felt as if there's a question, I see a unity, but you keep grasping at the variety. Why don't you know yourself properly and realize your true self? You can then march on to the realization of the unity of the self with the self. Nothing is so helpful as the august presence of the Maharshi for those who seriously intend to progress on the spiritual. So coming back to pick up the thread from where we had left last time we met, that I must be earnest myself. I must have that quality to know my limited self and wash the dirt. And washing the dirt doesn't mean doing anything, just knowing my limitations, knowing my personality, knowing the truants of my mind is very important for me to know this is who I am. And everybody who's good has some poor qualities, and everybody who's got poor qualities has good qualities. None of us are 100% pure. So my selfishness, I don't have to create examples. We all know. So we have to know ourselves, and we have to, once we know that, then the self begins to reveal itself, because the self sees an earnest devotee who has the longing, who has the desire, who has the willingness, who has the intensity to meet with that reality that we all are talking about. So that is where intent comes in. And last time, when thanks to Sujit, we were editing the video, I realized that I misspoke. I misspoke a word. For a moment, I said intent always comes from the heart. What I meant to say, as we sometimes speak and then realize later on, good intent always comes from the heart. When my intent is malicious, it comes from my mind. When my intent is not pure, when I have selfishness or anger or trying to get better by suppressing something else or whatever things that I do to always progress in the worldly way, there's some aberration. And those things come from the mind. But when I'm with a nobler thought, when I'm helping somebody, for example, without any expectation, that is coming from the heart. And once we know ourselves, and we know I'm connected to the mind, I'm connected with the heart, then the heart, the ultimate heart, again, sitting right behind here, heart opens up. And opens up a lotus, opens up a fragrance of that flower that I begin to experience. So self-inquiry is, no doubt, as Ramana Maharshi has said in verse number 17, he says, Manasam tukim margane krite, know the nature of your mind. How do I know the nature of my mind? Knowing the nature of my mind, the first step is to know my limited nature. Then I know the nature of my mind. The ultimate nature of my mind is the self. The ultimate self is who actually I am. And the variety that Bhagavan just told Manu Subedar, that I see unity, but you're focusing on the variety. We all are focused on it. My life, my life, my life, my life. And we do not withdraw from that. It's not easy to withdraw in a day. It's not easy to give up everything in a day. But slowly and slowly we can begin to withdraw from things. And that will open up the floodgates of the heart, of the truth, the realization, the self. And the screen that obscures me from seeing that reality will begin to get removed from being an obstacle to my being able to see the transparency of the self.